$20 could buy 6 months of flour, a serviceable saddle, or enough cartridges to make a careful man feel secure through winter. In Silver Hollow, it could also buy the remaining years of a woman's life. Gideon Rusk learned that before he had finished tying juniper outside Mose Kellen's store. A voice carried over the mining camp's central yard, sharp and oily above the clatter of wagons. "Strong back, knows laundry, stitching, and millwork. Contract runs until every cent is satisfied." Gideon left one hand on the mare's bridle. Silver Hollow had never needed help finding reasons to disgust him. The camp sat between two barren hills where smoke from the smelters collected instead of escaping. Ash powdered the roofs. Meltwater ran black beneath the boardwalks. Men arrived with dreams of gold and stayed long enough to learn how cheaply desperation could be purchased. Gideon came down twice a year for cornmeal, lamp oil, medicine, and metal fittings. He spoke to Mose, loaded juniper, and returned to Black Fir Mountain before anyone remembered to ask him personal questions. That morning, however, nearly 30 men had gathered around an ore wagon parked in front of Emmett Cray's supply house. A young woman stood in the wagon bed. Her wrists were tied together with a rawhide strap. A faded brown dress hung loosely from her shoulders, and one sleeve had been torn from wrist to elbow. Damp strands of dark blonde hair clung to her face. A bruise shadowed her left cheek, but the injury was not what held Gideon's attention. It was the absence inside her expression. She did not scan the crowd for help. She did not look at the road. She did not even watch Emmett Cray, though he stood beside her holding the loose end of the strap. She had already learned that looking changed nothing. Cray raised a folded document above his head. Her stepfather signed lawful surety. Food, lodging, medical fees, transport, interest. I'm offering the remaining obligation to any respectable man willing to assume the account. Someone near the wagon laughed. Respectable men don't live in Silver Hollow. The crowd answered with louder laughter. Cray smiled as though cruelty improved his salesmanship. She has 4 years left, according to the account. A miner with a broken front tooth called. I'll give 12. 25, Cray answered. The debt is worth more than that. Then keep her. I would, but she's become troublesome. The young woman did not move. Gideon looked toward Moses' store. His supplies were waiting inside. Clouds had been stacking against the western ridge since dawn, their undersides the color of old iron. If he left within the hour, he could reach the cedar shelter before the first snow. He should have gone inside. Instead, he heard himself ask, "What did she do?" The men nearest him turned. Cray noticed Gideon and brightened. "Rusk! Didn't take you for a man looking for household help." "I'm not." "Could use some all the same. Cabin must be a graveyard after all those years alone." Gideon stepped closer to the wagon. "What did she do?" Cray tugged the rawhide. The woman's shoulders tightened, but she still did not look up. "Refused to go downstairs with a paying guest," Cray said. "Then struck one of my men when he tried to explain her duties." A few miners chuckled. Gideon felt the old coldness settle through him, the kind that arrived before danger, when emotion narrowed into something cleaner. "That in the contract?" he asked. Cray's smile faltered. "The agreement covers labor necessary to repay the account." "Does it name the labor?" "You planning to practice law now?" "No." Gideon looked at the document in Cray's hand. "I'm deciding whether you're a liar or merely stupid." The yard went quiet enough that Gideon heard water dripping from the wagon axle. Cray's face reddened. He tightened his grip on the rawhide and pulled. The woman stumbled forward, striking one knee against the boards. This time she made a sound, not a cry, only a breath driven from her lungs. Gideon moved before he had finished deciding to. He stopped at the wagon's side and took a $20 gold piece from the inside pocket of his coat. It represented nearly half the money he had brought down the mountain. He held it between two fingers. 20. Cray stared at the coin. I said 25. You also said the contract was lawful. It is. Then take 20 and hand it over. Or keep talking until Sheriff Danner hears enough to wonder why a debt agreement requires a woman to entertain paying guests. Cray's eyes shifted toward the far end of the street. The sheriff's office was closed, but that hardly mattered. Men like Cray feared questions more than justice. 22, he said. Gideon put the coin back into his pocket. Cray cursed. Fine. 20. Gideon brought the coin out again, but did not toss it. The paper first. You think I'll cheat you? Yes. Someone laughed, then quickly stopped when Cray looked around. Cray climbs down from the wagon, the rawhide still wrapped around one fist. He held out the folded contract. Gideon opened it. The writing was cramped and stained. Most of the sum came from charges that multiplied upon themselves. Interest on medicine, interest on food, penalties for missed work, fees for the very paper Gideon now held. At the bottom was a shaky signature, Liddy Hale. Beneath it, in a heavier hand, was the name of her stepfather. Gideon read the first page twice. Then he looked up at the woman. Is Lydia your name? Her gaze rose slowly. Her eyes were gray-green, clear despite the emptiness around them. Yes. Did you agree to 4 years? A pause. I made a mark where he pointed. Could you read the paper? No. Cray scoffed. That changes nothing. Gideon folded the contract once. Then he tore it down the middle. Cray lunged forward. What the hell are you doing? Gideon tore the halves again and let the pieces fall into the muddy water beside the wheel. Ending the account. You bought the contract. I bought paper. She still owes. Gideon caught Cray's wrist before the man could reach for the scraps. Cray was not small, but his bones felt narrow inside Gideon's grip. The coin pays whatever fiction you wrote down, Gideon said. You come after her, and I'll bring the pieces to the territorial judge. We'll let him decide whether a man can charge interest on bruises. He placed the gold piece in Cray's palm and closed Cray's fingers around it. Then he climbed onto the wagon. Lydia watched his right hand move toward the knife at his belt. For the first time, her stillness broke. She recoiled so sharply that her back struck the wagon rail. Her bound hands rose toward her throat, and her eyes fixed on the blade as Gideon drew it. Not on his face, not on the crowd, only the knife. Gideon stopped. He turned the blade inward against his own palm, showing her the dull spine and keeping the edge away from her skin. I'm cutting the strap, he said. She did not answer. I won't touch you unless I have to steady your hands. Her breath came too quickly, but after several seconds she extended her wrists. Gideon slid 2 fingers beneath the rawhide to shield her skin. The strap had swollen from rain and cut deep grooves around both wrists. He saw dried blood beneath it. One careful draw of the knife severed the binding. Lydia pulled her hands against her chest. Gideon stepped back at once. You can leave, he said. Confusion moved across her face. Cray climbed into the wagon behind him. Leave for where? Gideon turned. Cray stopped. Gideon climbed down without answering him. The crowd opened a path. He reached Mose Kellen's store, gathered the sack of cornmeal, the medical supplies, and the iron pipe fitting he had ordered. Mose said nothing about the yard until they carried the final crate outside. Then the older man glanced toward the wagon. You know Cray keeps copies. Not of a contract witnessed by no one. He'll make another. Then write down what you saw. Mose studied him. Gideon tightened the rope around the crate. Name, date, amount. Write that Cray accepted full payment and surrendered the agreement. You plan on taking her with you? I told her she could leave. That wasn't the question. Gideon looked across the yard. Lydia stood where he had left her, beside the ore wagon. Cray was gone. The crowd had dispersed now that there was no humiliation left to enjoy. She had no coat, no bundle, no place to go. I'm heading north, Gideon said. Mose followed his gaze. Storm's moving faster than you are. I know. Black Fir is no place for someone dressed like that. I know that too. Mose disappeared inside and returned with a folded wool blanket and a sheet of paper. He handed Gideon both. I wrote the statement. Gideon read it, folded it into his coat, and carried the blanket across the yard. Lydia watched him approach. Road splits beyond the sawmill, he said. South goes toward Boise. North goes into the mountains. She said nothing. There's a church mission south of town. They may take you in. Her eyes flicked toward the southern road. Two of Cray's men stood near the livery stable. They were pretending not to watch. Gideon followed her gaze. Or you can ride north as far as my cabin, he said. The pass will likely close tonight. When it opens, you can decide where to go. What do I owe? Nothing. Her expression did not change, but he saw her withdraw somewhere behind it. The wrong answer, apparently. He gave her the blanket. You'll freeze before you reach either road without that. She took it carefully, holding it away from her body as though gifts could conceal hooks. Gideon returned to Juniper. He secured the supplies, mounted, and rode north without looking back. At the last buildings, he heard footsteps behind him. Lydia was following on foot. She kept 10 paces between herself and Juniper's tail. Gideon let her walk until the camp vanished behind the first line of pines. Then the wind shifted, driving needles of sleet across the trail. He stopped. You ridden before? A work mule. Juniper is less stubborn. The mare turned her head as if offended. Lydia remained where she was. Gideon dismounted and loosened the rope securing one crate. He moved supplies onto the pack frame to clear space behind the saddle. You can ride or keep walking, he said. But if you walk, we'll both be caught above the ravine after dark. She approached the mare from the side, watching Gideon rather than the animal. I need to lift you, he said. By the waist, only long enough to put you behind the saddle. Lydia gripped the blanket. Gideon waited. Finally, she nodded. He placed his hands lightly at her sides and lifted. Beneath the thin dress, she seemed made of angles and breath. The instant she found the saddle, he released her. She sat rigidly behind him. There's a leather loop on either side, he said. Use those. She found the straps instead of touching him. Juniper climbed steadily while Silver Hollow disappeared beneath cloud and timber. For the first hour, Lydia said nothing. The trail narrowed along a slope where dark firs leaned over 100-foot drop. Gideon felt each time she lost balance because the saddle shifted, but she never reached for him. At noon, he stopped beneath an overhanging shelf of granite. Snow had replaced the sleet. He handed her a strip of dried venison and half a biscuit. She ate the meat in small bites. The biscuit disappeared into the folds of the blanket. Gideon pretended not to notice until she had drunk from the canteen. You can keep it, he said. Her hand tightened around the hidden biscuit. I wasn't stealing. I didn't say you were. I'll eat it later. There's more. For now. The words were quiet and matter-of-fact. Gideon looked out at the whitening trail. Yes, he said. For now. She seemed surprised that he had not contradicted her. They rode on. By late afternoon, Lydia's grip had weakened. Twice, Gideon felt her slide. The third time, he stopped Juniper before she fell. You need to hold my coat. Her face tightened. Not me, he clarified. The back seam. It's thick enough. She found the seam between his shoulder blades and closed both hands around it. When the trail steepened, her forehead occasionally touched his back. Each time she pulled away, as though contact itself were dangerous. Gideon did not mention it. The storm overtook them near dusk. Wind erased the trail behind Juniper almost as quickly as her hooves made it. Gideon navigated by the slope of the land, a split granite marker, and the dark line of Black Fir Creek beneath the snow. The cabin appeared only when they were 50 yards away. It stood in a grove of enormous firs, built low against the wind, with a woodshed attached to one side and a narrow loft beneath the roof. Snow already covered the lower half of the door. Gideon dismounted. Lydia tried to slide down by herself, her knees folded when her boots touched the ground. He caught her elbow before she struck the snow, then released it the moment she found her footing. "Inside," he said. "Latch lifts upward." She opened the door but remained on the threshold. Gideon saw her studying the single downstairs room. The stove, work table, shelves, narrow bed against the far wall, ladder leading to the loft. She looked for exits first. He led Juniper into the lean-to stable, stripped off the saddle and load, rubbed the mare dry, and gave her hay. By the time he entered the cabin, Lydia had moved only far enough to close the door. Darkness had gathered around her. Gideon lit the lamp and started the stove. The cabin filled slowly with the scent of burning fur. He pointed toward the ladder. "There's a room in the loft." Her eyes followed his hand. "It has a door," he continued. "Bar drops from the inside. I sleep down here." "Why?" "Because my bed is down here." She looked toward the narrow mattress. He understood the question beneath hers. "I won't enter the loft without your permission." Lydia's gaze returned to him. Gideon took a clean shirt, wool stockings, and an old pair of drawstring trousers from a chest. He set them on the first ladder rung rather than handing them to her. "Dry clothes. They'll be large." "What do they cost?" "Nothing." Again, that withdrawal. Gideon was beginning to understand that nothing sounded less like generosity to her than a price not yet disclosed. He turned his back. "Change upstairs. Keep the blanket. There's water in the pitcher." She climbed the ladder without making a sound. Gideon heated stew left from the previous evening and divided it into 2 bowls. He placed one at each end of the table. When Lydia came down, his shirt reached nearly to her knees, and she had rolled the trouser legs several times above her ankles. Her wet hair hung loose around her shoulders. She remained beside the ladder. "Sit anywhere," he said. She chose the stool nearest the door. He ate without watching her. After several minutes, he heard her spoon touch the bowl. She consumed less than half the stew. When Gideon stood to carry his dish away, her hand moved quickly beneath the table. He saw bread vanish into the pocket of the trousers. He placed another piece beside her bowl. She stared at it. "You don't need to hide what's already yours," he said. Her face closed. Gideon sat again. Outside, wind struck the cabin in long, steady blows. Snow hissed against the shutters. Lydia listened to each sound as though measuring the walls. At last, she asked, "How much food is here?" "Enough for 2 through spring, if we're careful." "And if the winter lasts longer?" "We hunt." "If the traps fail?" "We reduce portions." "And after that?" Gideon studied her. "After that, we solve the problem when it comes." Lydia's fingers tightened around the spoon. "The ground near the trees," she said. "Does it freeze first?" He did not understand. "Which trees?" "The black firs behind the cabin." "All the ground freezes." "How deep?" 3 feet, sometimes more." She nodded, absorbing the information. Then she looked directly at him. "If I have to dig before that happens, where do you want the grave?" The wind seemed to pull every sound from the room. Gideon set down his cup. Lydia waited with the quiet attention of someone asking where to stack firewood. He forced himself to speak evenly. Whose grave? Mine. Something cold moved through him that had nothing to do with the storm. Why would you be digging your grave? Because there are two of us now. Her voice remained calm. The food was meant for one. When it gets low, you'll choose the person who can hunt. I only need to know where you want me before the earth hardens. Gideon stared at her. She had calculated her death before taking a full night's sleep beneath his roof. She had placed it beside firewood, food, and weather, another winter task to finish before conditions became inconvenient. He rose. Lydia flinched and pushed the stool backward. Gideon stopped at once. Her hand had closed around the spoon as though it were a weapon. Terror sharpened her features, but she made no sound. He lowered himself into the chair again. I'm not angry with you. She did not loosen her grip. I'm angry that someone taught you to ask that. Her eyes dropped. Gideon took the written statement from inside his coat and placed it on the table between them. Mose Kellen recorded what happened today. Cray accepted payment. The contract was surrendered. Mose signed it. I signed it. When the road opens, you can carry this to the territorial office if anyone challenges you. Lydia did not touch the page. Gideon continued. There are 3 rules in this cabin. She looked up. First, no one owns you here. Not for $20, not for $20,000. A faint line appeared between her brows. Second, food is not wages. You eat whether you work or not. That isn't sensible. It's my food. I decide what's sensible. For the first time, something almost like irritation moved through her fear. Gideon considered it an improvement. Third, the loft belongs to you while you're here. I don't cross that door unless you invite me. When the pass opens, you choose whether to leave. And if I stay? Then we decide the next thing when it becomes the next thing. She looked at the bread beside her bowl. What do you expect from me tonight? Sleep. And tomorrow? Wake up. Her eyes rose to his. That's all? That's enough to begin with. Lydia sat motionless for a long while. Then she took the hidden bread from her pocket and placed it beside the second piece. She did not eat either one, but she no longer concealed them. When she climbed to the loft, Gideon waited until he heard the wooden bar drop into place behind her door. Only then did he bank the fire and lie down on the bed below. Above him, the floorboards creaked once. Then again. Lydia was testing the latch. Gideon stared into the dark until the cabin settled around them. He had paid $20 to cut a strap and tear up a piece of paper. Lying awake beneath the locked room, he understood how little of her captivity those actions had actually reached. Before dawn, Gideon woke to the sound of metal striking wood. A controlled tap, a pause, then the scrape of something being pulled tight. The stove had burned low, and gray light pressed against the shutters. The loft door stood open. Lydia sat on the floor beside Juniper's harness. She had spread the breast collar and traces across an old grain sack. One leather loop had split nearly through, and she was stitching it with a bone awl and a strip of rawhide. She had also swept the ashes, filled the water bucket, stacked kindling, and arranged the food tins in straight rows. Gideon sat up. Her head turned at once. Her shoulders rose, waiting. What time did you get up? I don't know. Was it dark? Yes. Then too early. She looks back at the harness. This would have broken under weight. I know. Why didn't you fix it? I was going to. When? Before I used it. Her mouth tightened as if that were an irresponsible answer. Gideon rebuilt the fire. Behind him, Lydia resumed stitching. You don't have to do that, he said. I know. The words came too quickly. She had learned his rules well enough to repeat them, not well enough to believe them. Did you eat? Yes. The bread loaf was untouched, so was the pot of beans. "What did you eat?" "Some bread." Gideon found 2 pieces wrapped in cloth and hidden beneath the wool blanket on the 3rd ladder rung. He set them on the table. Lydia went still. "I wasn't taking extra." "I didn't say you were." "I saved what you gave me." "For what?" "In case the snow holds, or the traps fail." Her gaze stayed on the bread. "Or in case you decide I've eaten too much." Gideon opened the food cupboard. "Come count it." She did not move. "That wasn't an order. I want you to see what's here." After a moment, she crouched beside the shelves. She weighed sacks in her hands, checked the pork crock with one thumb, and counted under her breath. "Enough flour and cornmeal for 2 people until late March," she said. "Longer with meat. Potatoes under the table, dried apples in the shed. And if the pass stays closed through April, we make thinner stew." "That isn't a plan." "No, it's the start of one." He took a piece of charcoal and marked the inside of the cupboard door. "Every Sunday, we count what remains. You can see the stores. You can tell me if I'm wasting them." Her eyes lifted. "You'd let me do that?" "I just did." The tension in her face eased by a fraction. Gideon returned the hidden bread to the shelf. "If you want to save food, keep it here. Mice will find it under your blanket." "There are mice?" "There are always mice." She moved the bread into the cupboard immediately. By daylight, snow had muffled the mountain. Gideon found Lydia testing the repaired harness with both hands. The rawhide stitches lay flat and even. "You've done this before?" "At a river mill." "With horses?" "Mules. They hauled logs from the bank." "What stitch is that?" "Crosslock." "Who taught you?" "A man named Abel. He lost 2 fingers and said leather was easier to reason with than people." Gideon nearly smiled. He was right. She watched him closely, uncertain whether he was making fun of her. He tugged the repair once more. "It'll hold. You should oil it before the cold makes it brittle." She had already placed the grease tin beside his glove. Gideon rubbed the leather, then put on his coat. "I'm checking the near traps. Keep the stove to 1 or 2 logs. Don't let the chimney pipe glow." "What should I do?" "Eat." Her jaw hardened. He considered giving her a useless chore simply to quiet the fear in her. Instead, he pointed to a wet strip of hide. "Cut 6 thongs the same width as your repair. I'm nearly out." Lydia nodded immediately. "And stop at 6. She glanced at his knife. "I need something to cut with." Gideon placed a short utility blade on the table rather than in her hand. "Edge away from your body. Leather slips when it warms." "I know. Abel taught me." He nodded and left. The cold burned his throat. Snow reached nearly to his knees, dry above and heavy underneath. He found 2 traps empty, one sprung, and one holding a snowshoe hare. He reset the line and returned earlier than necessary. Smoke rose steadily from the cabin. The chimney pipe was not glowing. Inside, 6 rawhide thongs lay on the workbench. Beside them sat another 12. Lydia stood on a stool, reaching toward the highest shelf. "What are you doing?" She startled. The stool tilted. Gideon caught its edge before it slipped. He did not touch her. Lydia seized the shelf and regained her balance. "Get down." She stepped to the floor. "I said 6. The first 6 were done." "So you made more." "The hide was already wet." The table had been scrubbed. Soot had been wiped from the wall. His shirts had been removed from the chest and stacked by size. "You went through my things." Fear shut across her face. "I didn't take anything." "That isn't what I asked." "I was making room." "For what?" She had no answer. Beneath the stool, Gideon saw his old shirts rolled tightly inside the blanket Mose had given her. Everything she owned was packed and ready to carry. "You expect me to send you away?" "I expect you to decide." I decided last night. That was last night. Every hour without punishment was not proof to her. It was only time before the proof failed. Gideon removed his coat. You repaired something I needed. That was useful. You made more thongs than I asked for. That was unnecessary. And I don't like people moving my tools. I'm sorry. I'm not finished. Her chin lowered. If you don't know whether to touch something, ask. If I say no, it means no. It does not mean you're being sent outside. She looked up cautiously. And when you finish a task, you stop. You don't hunt for another until your hands split open. Her sleeves had slipped back. The raw grooves around her wrists were redder than the day before. One had swollen enough to shine. A yellow stain marks the borrowed cuff. Hold out your hands. Lydia pulled down her sleeves. No. It was the first refusal she had given him. Gideon kept his voice level. Are the cuts worse? They're fine. They're leaking through the cloth. I can wrap them. He took clean linen, salve, and a brown glass bottle from the shelf. Lydia backed toward the ladder. I said no. Gideon stopped. Her fear had fixed on the bottle. Cray used spirits on wounds? Her breathing changed. He set the bottle down. No spirits, and I won't touch you. She remained beside the ladder. I need to know whether it's infected. You can unwrap it yourself. After a long silence, Lydia sat on the bottom rung. A dirty strip of cloth had been tied beneath her sleeve. She tried to loosen the knot, but her fingers shook. Gideon turned his back. There are scissors beside the salve. He heard the cloth pull free. You can look, she said. The wound circled most of her wrist. Its edges were swollen, and a narrow red streak had begun climbing the inside of her forearm. Gideon's stomach tightened. How long has it looked like that? It didn't yesterday. Does your arm ache? A little. Headache? She hesitated. Yes. Cold? No. She was shivering. Gideon added a log to the stove. Sit at the table. We'll use boiled water. What if it gets worse? I take you to the mission doctor. The pass hasn't closed at the lower fork yet. You'd lose the stores. I can buy more. You spent $20 already. Gideon met her eyes. That coin paid Cray to surrender his claim. It did not put a price on keeping you alive. She looked away, but not before he saw the words land somewhere she had no defense prepared. He poured boiled water into a basin and let it cool. Lydia cleaned the wound herself while he talked her through it. When her fingers failed at the bandage, he asked before holding one end. She gave a small nod. Only then did he touch the linen. Her skin was hot beneath his fingertips. By evening, she had stopped arguing about rest. She sat wrapped in the wool blanket beside the stove, a bowl of broth untouched in her lap. The red streak had climbed another inch. Gideon opened the door and studied the trail. Wind drove snow sideways through the firs. The route to the lower fork was already vanishing. Behind him, Lydia's spoon struck the floor. He turned. Her eyes were open, but they no longer followed him. Lydia? She tried to answer. What came out was a name. Toby. Her body folded sideways. Gideon caught her before she struck the floor. This time she did not recoil from his hands. She was burning with fever. Outside, the storm closed over Black Fir Mountain before he could carry her anywhere. Gideon carried her to the downstairs bed and pulled the blankets over her without undressing her. He removed only the wet bandage from her wrist. Even unconscious, Lydia tried to wrench her arm away. No, she murmured. I'll finish. There's nothing to finish. Toby's waiting. The name came with a different kind of fear. Gideon set a pot of water over the stove and added willow bark from a jar on the shelf. He had used it for headaches, fever, and the deep ache that settled into old injuries before storms. It was not medicine enough for a red streak climbing toward a woman's elbow, but it was what he had. He cleansed the wound again, speaking before each touch. "I'm lifting your hand." Her fingers twitched. "I'm changing the cloth." She turned her face toward the wall. "I'm putting the blanket back." The explanations felt foolish when she could not answer, but he continued anyway. Some part of her might still be listening. More importantly, he needed to remain the man whose hands did what his words had promised. The fever rose through the night. Snow packed against the shutters until the cabin seemed buried. Gideon kept the fire steady, cooled Lydia's face with damp cloths, and coaxed spoonfuls of willow tea between her lips. Whenever her breathing grew too shallow, he sat her upright against his chest until she swallowed. Near midnight, she began speaking clearly enough for him to understand. "Toby, keep your shoes on." Gideon looked down. Her eyes were closed. One hand searched the blanket. "The water's over the road," she whispered. "We'll wait for it to fall." A gust struck the cabin. Lydia flinched so violently that the spoon fell from Gideon's hand. "No, sir, he can't pull the cart. He's 6. Her voice changed on the last word. It became younger. "He can carry the small sack. I'll take the other 2. Gideon had known men who shouted through pain and men who laughed while bleeding. Lydia's quiet pleading was harder to hear than either. He took her uninjured hand. "I'm here." She gripped him with surprising force. "Toby?" "No, Gideon." Her fingers loosened. "I lost him." Gideon said nothing. "The river took the footbridge. Cray said we had to cross before dark." Her breath caught. "I tied him to me. I tied him right." A tear slid into her hair. "The rope broke." Gideon felt the shape of the story before she finished it. A child, floodwater, an order given by a man who would not risk himself. "I went after him," she whispered. "Cray held me down." Her nails dug into Gideon's palm. "He said 1 debt was cheaper than 2. The words left a silence the storm could not fill. Gideon looked toward the ladder, where Lydia had packed her few possessions for the moment he changed his mind. She had not been preparing only for herself. Somewhere inside her, a 6-year-old boy was still waiting on the far side of floodwater, and every failure to work fast enough threatened to take him again. "You didn't lose him," Gideon said. Her face tightened. "The river did. Cray did. You were a child trying to hold another child together." "No." "Yes." "No." The refusal became a broken sound. Gideon bent closer. "You tied him to the person you trusted most. That was you." Her grip weakened, but she did not let go. Gideon remained beside the bed until dawn, his hand trapped in hers. The second day passed in fragments. Lydia woke only long enough to drink. Gideon changed the dressing whenever the yellow stain returned. He marked the end of the red streak with charcoal so he could tell whether it climbed farther. By evening, it had not. He ate standing at the stove. He slept in the chair for minutes at a time. When the wood box emptied, he crossed to the shed through a tunnel he shoveled beneath the drift, never staying away longer than it took to fill his arms. On the third morning, Lydia opened her eyes and recognized him. She stared at their joined hands. Gideon released hers at once. "You were holding on," he said. Her voice was raw. "How long?" 2 days. "I was supposed to cut the rest of the thongs." The mountain survived without them. She tried to sit up. Gideon put one hand near her shoulder, not touching. "May I?" After a moment, she nodded. He helped her rise and placed a cup in her hands. She drank slowly, studying the bandage around her wrist. "What did I say?" "Enough to know Toby was your brother." All color left her face. I don't remember. You don't have to tell it again. What else? That you tried to save him. Her eyes dropped to the cup. I failed. No. You weren't there. No. But I know a child doesn't control a flooded river. She looked toward the shuttered window. Cray said I should have held tighter. Cray found profit in making you guilty. She swallowed. He added Toby's burial fee to the account. Gideon's hand closed around the edge of the chair. For one clear second, he imagined riding down the mountain, finding Emmett Cray, and ending a list of cruelties no court would ever count properly. Then Lydia drew the blanket closer, and the need to remain where he was proved stronger. He won't collect another cent from you, Gideon said. She gave a tired, humorless breath. He already collected 20. No. He collected 20 from me for a worthless piece of paper. Her gaze met his. That isn't the same thing. Then what was it? The price of making him let go without a gunfight. Something in her expression shifted. Not trust. Trust was too large a word for what had grown between them. But she looked at him as though the answer had opened a door she had not known existed. Her fever broke that afternoon. Sweat soaked the shirt at her back, and the heat left her so quickly that Gideon piled quilts over her while she shivered. By nightfall, the red streak had faded below the charcoal mark. For the next 4 days, he allowed her out of bed only to use the privy and sit by the stove. Lydia argued on the first day. On the second, she tried to mend a glove beneath the blanket. Gideon took it away. Rest. My hands work. Your body is using the same blood. That doesn't make sense. It makes enough. On the third day, she asked for the inventory charcoal. Gideon brought the cupboard door to her attention by reading each mark aloud. She calculated how much food they had used during her illness and frowned. We're ahead on flour and behind on wood. I know. You missed the East traps. I know that too. You shouldn't have. He leaned back in the chair. You were dying. I wasn't. You were making plans with a dead boy. The words silenced her. Gideon regretted their bluntness until Lydia said, Did I frighten you? He could have lied. Yes. She studied him as if fear were a language she had never heard a man admit speaking. On the 5th morning, Gideon found her dressed and waiting at the table. Not working, waiting. It was such a deliberate act of restraint that he understood what it cost her. What can I do? She asked. He set Juniper's snowshoe harness on the table. A wooden toggle had cracked during the ascent from Silver Hollow. Tell me how you'd repair that. Lydia examined it without touching. Maple peg through the old hole, leather collar around the split. If you drill a second hole, the grain will fail. You've repaired snow gear? Log sleds, same pull, different shape. Show me. He placed the tools within reach and watched her choose the smallest auger. Her movements were slower than before the fever, but they were exact. She aligned the peg with the grain, softened leather over steam, and formed the collar so it tightened as it cooled. Gideon did not correct her once. When she finished, he attached the toggle and pulled against it with his full weight. It held. Lydia's shoulders lowered. Useful? She asked. Necessary. The word affected her more than praise would have. Over the next week, her strength returned. Gideon gave her one task each morning and let her choose whether to accept it. Sometimes she refused because her wrist hurt. Each refusal came hesitantly, followed by a pause in which she seems to expect the cabin itself to reject her. Nothing happened. The fire continued to burn. Food appeared at both places on the table. The loft remained hers. One afternoon, Lydia stood before the cupboard with the charcoal in hand. We have more salt than the marks say. There's another sack in the shed. You didn't list it. Forgot. That makes the count useless. Gideon looked up from sharpening an axe. You want the key? She stared at him. The storehouse was not merely a shed. It held dried meat, flour, ammunition, lamp oil, tools, and the emergency silver Gideon kept beneath a loose plank. In winter, the key meant access to everything a person might need to leave, or survive without him. He removed it from the cord around his neck and placed it on the table. Lydia did not reach for it. "You said to ask before touching your things. I'm telling you to take it." "Why?" "Because you count better than I do." "That's not enough reason." "It is for the stores." Her gaze remained on the key. Gideon understood. Trust, offered without explanation, could resemble another trap. He crossed to the chest beneath the window and opened it. From under a folded map, he took a brass compass with a dent along its lid. "My brother Caleb carried this when we guided survey crews." Lydia looked at the compass, then at him. "He died in an avalanche 8 years ago," Gideon said. "I was 50 yards away and still couldn't reach him." Her face softened, though she offered no pity. "I kept thinking a better man would have seen the slope break sooner, chosen another route, dug faster." "Could you have?" "I don't know." "That isn't the same as yes." The answer was so close to his own words beside her sickbed that Gideon almost looked away. Instead, he opened the compass. The needle trembled, then found north. "I've kept it locked up because I didn't want to lose what was left of him." He set it beside the key. "You know how to use one?" "Abel showed me." "Then carry it. Storms turn this ridge white in minutes. The cabin lies southwest of the east traps. Creek lies south. Never trust one landmark when snow is moving." Lydia's hands remained in her lap. "You're giving me both?" "I'm trusting you with both." "What if I leave?" "Then you leave with a compass and enough food to reach the valley." "And the silver?" He watched her eyes. "You found that." "The loose plank isn't fitted right." Gideon almost laughed. "Leave enough for property tax." A small sound escaped her. It took him a moment to recognize it as the beginning of a laugh. She picked up the storehouse key first, then the compass. The brass disappeared inside her palm. That evening, Lydia made the inventory marks herself. Gideon sat across the room repairing a trap chain while she counted sacks, jars, cartridges, and dried meat. She no longer asked permission before opening the cupboard. Before climbing to the loft, she returned the compass to the table. Gideon shook his head. "You carry it." "Inside the cabin? Until you decide you don't need it?" She closed her hand around it again. At the ladder, she paused. "Gideon?" It was the first time she had said his name without fear, fever, or formality. He looked up. "If Caleb had been the one standing 50 yards away," she said, "would you blame him for the mountain?" Gideon could not answer at once. Lydia waited, then gave a small nod as if his silence had told her enough. She climbed to the loft. A moment later, the wooden bar settled into place. But that night, Gideon did not hear her test it twice. The weeks that followed gave Black Fir Cabin a rhythm neither of them named. Gideon taught Lydia the near trap route, the path across the creek, beneath the limestone shelf, and home through young spruce. She remembered every warning after hearing it once, then improved what he had accepted for years. On her first trip, she stopped beside the wood sled and studied the traces against Juniper's flanks. "The pull is too low." "It pulls." "It wastes the mare." She shortened one strap, lengthened another, and moved the spreader bar higher. On the return climb, the sled tracked straight instead of sliding sideways. At the cabin, Gideon handed her the awl. "Make it permanent." By midwinter, Lydia could reset his near snares, read rope tension by plucking it with one nail, and identify safe ground beneath fresh snow. She tied strips of red cloth along the route so neither memory nor weather held complete authority over their return. At night, they worked across from each other. Gideon repaired iron, Lydia stitched harnesses and fitted rawhide webbing to snowshoes sized for her feet. Sometimes they discussed weather and food. Sometimes the cabin stayed quiet for hours. The silence no longer felt guarded. It felt shared. Near the end of January, Lydia moved her packed bundle away from the loft door and put it inside the storage chest. Neither of them mentioned it. The whiteout announced itself with a pale ring around the moon. By breakfast, wind pushed smoke backward through the chimney. Lydia stood at the window with Caleb's compass in her palm. The pressure's falling. Gideon looked toward the north side of the clearing. An old fir leaned over the cabin. Lightning had split its trunk years before, and the weight of snow now bowed its upper branches above the loft. When the wind struck, roots lifted beneath the frozen ground. "If it falls?" Lydia asked. "It takes the loft and half the chimney." "What do we do?" "I cut the lower branches and pull it toward the open slope. You keep the stove hot and watch Juniper." "That storm is why you shouldn't work alone." "I won't leave the clearing." "That isn't the same as safe." "No." The honesty quieted her, though it did not reassure her. Gideon harnessed Juniper to the empty sled and ran a rope from the leaning fir through an iron ring on a sound tree. Lydia checked the traces. "The left buckle is stiff." "I'll oil it later." "Do it now." He looked at her, then reached for the oil. By noon, snow moved sideways. Gideon removed 3 heavy limbs and cut a guiding notch in the trunk. The wood beneath the bark was dark. Rot had eaten through the heart. He lowered the axe and pointed Lydia toward the cabin. She disappeared inside. He should have followed. Instead, he judged that one more cut would send the tree safely downhill. The next gust broke it first. The fir folded above the notch. The upper trunk swung sideways against the rope. Gideon ran, but the line snapped tight around his ankle and threw him down. A heavy branch struck his left shoulder and drove him face down into the snow. The trunk settled across it, trapping him beneath several 100 pounds of wood. Pain burned from his shoulder to his fingers. When he tried to move, the joint ground sickeningly, and his vision darkened. He turned his face enough to breathe. "Lydia!" The wind erased her name. The cabin stood less than 70 yards away, but the whiteout had reduced the world to the nearest few feet. Gideon cut the rope from his ankle with his right hand. Digging only made the trunk sink lower. Then Juniper screamed somewhere beyond the snow. The broken line jerked. The tree shifted, crushing the branch harder against him, then stopped. At the cabin, the impact shook soot from the stovepipe. Lydia reached the door as Juniper burst out of the white, dragging half the climbing rope. Gideon was not with her. For one terrible moment, Lydia could not move. Outside was the same blank force that had swallowed Toby beyond the flooded footbridge. Her hands went numb. The doorway seemed to tilt. Then she saw the cleanly cut end of the rope. Gideon had been alive long enough to use his knife. That gave her something stronger than courage. A task. She put on Gideon's spare coat, tied a scarf over her mouth, and filled a canvas bag with the small axe, 2 pulleys, rawhide straps, and a blanket. She fastened a safety rope to the iron ring beside the door and opened Caleb's compass. North-northwest. She stepped into the white. Every 10 paces, Lydia drove a short stake into the snow and looped the safety line around it. At 50 paces, the rope reached its end. Beyond it, she found one of Gideon's boot prints, already fading. She untied herself from the last physical connection to shelter. "Gideon!" A cough answered. She followed it to the fallen tree and dug until his face emerged. "I told you to stay inside," he said. Relief and anger struck her together. "You also said you wouldn't leave the clearing." "I didn't." "Then stop wasting breath." His left shoulder sat lower than the right. Only his thumb and 2 fingers moved. Lydia wrapped the blanket around him and studied the fallen crown. Cutting the branch would drop more weight onto him. Lifting it directly was impossible. But part of Gideon's rope remained caught around the trunk. At the river mill, Abel had taught her that a person did not need to be stronger than a load. The load only needed to pull against itself. She strapped one pulley to the sound fir and another to the fallen trunk, then threaded the surviving rope through both. It was too short to reach Juniper, so Lydia added spare harness straps with cross-lock knots. "That splice won't hold the full weight," Gideon warned. "It doesn't have to hold long." She followed the red route markers to the cabin and led Juniper back through the storm. The mare resisted until Lydia held Gideon's glove beneath her nose. At the tree, Lydia attached the line to the higher trace point she had designed. The buckle Gideon had oiled moved freely. "Easy," she told Juniper. The mare leaned into the harness. The pulleys turned. The trunk lifted less than an inch. Again. Juniper pulled harder. The branch loosened. Gideon dragged with his right elbow, but his trapped arm remained beneath him. Lydia crawled close and seized the back of his coat. "Pull," he said. She hauled while Juniper held the strain. The cross-lock splice began to separate. Lydia braced both feet and dragged Gideon once more. The knot tore apart. The trunk crashed down as he rolled clear. For several seconds, Lydia lay beside him, hearing only her own breath. Gideon opened his eyes. "You altered the harness wrong," he whispered. She stared until she saw the faint smile beneath the ice in his beard. "You can complain after we reach the cabin." She lashed him to the sled, bound his injured arm against his chest, and followed the compass southwest. The red markers appeared one at a time through the storm. Where they vanished, she found the stakes and safety line leading home. By the time the cabin emerged, Gideon had stopped speaking. Lydia dragged the sled through the door and cut away the left sleeve of his coat. His shoulder was badly swollen, and his fingers were turning blue. She remembered Abel resetting the mill foreman's shoulder after a loading chain threw him from a platform. Knowing the method was not the same as using it on Gideon. His eyes opened. "Dislocated?" he asked. "Maybe broken too." "Put it back." "I could make it worse." "If it stays out, I lose the arm." Lydia gave him whiskey, folded a blanket beneath his elbow, and fastened a broad strap around his upper arm. She anchored the strap to the loft post, braced both feet against his ribs, and pulled steadily on his wrist. Sweat ran from his temples. "Keep going," he said through his teeth. She leaned back with all her weight. The joint moved with a dull knock. Gideon went slack. Lydia released the strap and found his pulse. Color slowly returned to his fingers. Only then did she begin to shake. She splinted the arm against his chest and covered him with blankets. When his eyes opened again, the storm still hammered the roof. "You came out," he said. "You didn't come back. You could have died. So could you. That's different." "No." The quiet refusal stopped him. Lydia placed the storehouse key and Caleb's compass on the floor between them. Gideon frowned. "Why are you returning those?" "I'm not." She pushed them close enough for him to see. "You trusted me with what kept us alive. Today I used it. You don't get to call your life different because I'm the one who came for you." Gideon stared at the woman who had entered the whiteout carrying every lesson he had given her, and several he had not. His right hand closed around the compass. For an instant, Lydia thought he meant to take it. Instead, he pressed it back into her palm. "Keep it." Before exhaustion pulled him under, his right hand found hers on the floor. This time, neither pretended the contact was accidental. The fur had missed the cabin. Inside it, Gideon finally understood that he had not brought a helpless woman up the mountain. He had brought home the person who would carry him through it. Gideon woke to sunlight on the floor and pain radiating from his left shoulder to the tips of his fingers. He tried to close that hand. The thumb moved. The first two fingers bent halfway. The others lay against the blanket as if they belonged to someone else. Lydia sat beside the stove, scraping ice from a trap chain. She looked over at the sound of his breathing. "Don't test it yet." "I already did." "And?" "Badly." She set the chain down and crossed the room. Before touching the sling, she waited. Gideon nodded. Her hands were careful as she checked the swelling. The joint remained in place, but his wrist barely responded when she asked him to turn it. "You'll need time," she said. "Time doesn't cut wood." "No, axes do." He looked toward the wood box. It was full. For the next 10 days, Lydia did the work that had once defined him. She fed juniper, split kindling, checked the near snares, and hauled water through a path she kept clear between the cabin and creek. Gideon taught from the chair. He corrected the angle of her axe, showed her how to read drag marks around a sprung trap, and told her which trees burned hot enough to preserve the better wood. Each instruction helped them survive. Each one also reminded him that she was learning how to survive without him. His left hand improved by degrees too small to satisfy him. He could lift a cup if he used both hands. He could hold a strip of leather between thumb and forefinger. He could not close his fist, draw a bow, or steady a rifle. One afternoon, he tried to sharpen the hatchet alone. The handle slipped. The blade struck the floor inches from his boot. Lydia took the stone from him. "I can do it." "I know." "Then let me." "I said I know." The harshness in his voice filled the cabin. Lydia set the stone down. She did not flinch as she once would have, but the quiet in her face was worse. Gideon turned away. That evening, she placed supper beside him and ate at the other end of the table. The space between them felt like the first night again. He slept badly. At dawn, he removed the loose floorboard in the storehouse with his right hand. Beneath it lay $86 in coins, Mose Kellen's freedom statement, and the ownership paper for Juniper. He put everything into a canvas pouch. When Lydia returned from the traps, snow clung to her skirt and a rabbit hung from one hand. Gideon placed the pouch on the table. "The lower road should open within 3 weeks." She looked at the money but did not touch it. "Maybe. When it does, you take Juniper and go to Boise." Her expression became very still. "You'll have enough for lodging and work clothes. Mose's statement proves Cray has no claim. The mayor's paper is in the pouch." "And you?" "I'll manage." "With one working hand?" "I managed before you came." "That isn't an answer." "It's the one I have." Lydia hung the rabbit by the door. Every movement was controlled. "Why are you sending me away?" "Because the next accident may happen when no one can pull me out." "So?" "So I won't have you trapped here feeding a man who can't do his own work." "You fed me when I couldn't stand. That was different." Her eyes sharpened. "You already tried that word." Gideon pushed the pouch toward her. "I brought you here because the storm was coming. The storm is ending." "You brought me here because I had nowhere safe to go." "Now you'll have money. Yours. It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." He stood too quickly. Pain crossed his shoulder, but he kept his face hard. "I paid to get Cray's hands off you. I won't replace his claim with mine." "No one asked you to." "You stay because you think you owe me." Lydia stared at him. Then she reached inside her coat and placed Caleb's compass beside the pouch. The brass lid struck the table with a small, final sound. "Did I go into the whiteout because I owed you?" Gideon said nothing. "Did I put your shoulder back because $20 required it?" "No." "Then why do you get to decide that everything I do is debt?" "I'm trying to give you a life." You are trying to choose one for me." Her voice did not rise, yet the words hit harder than shouting. "You told me the loft was mine. You told me food was not wages. You said that when the pass opened, I would choose whether to leave." Gideon's jaw tightened. "I didn't know I'd become this." Lydia looked at his useless hand. "This what?" "A burden." The word left him raw. She crossed the room until only the table stood between them. "When I was sick, did you count the water you carried?" "No." "Did you count the nights you stayed awake?" "No." "Then stop keeping a ledger now because the entries frighten you." Gideon looked down at the coins. "If you stay, the work falls on you." "Some of it." "Most." "For now?" "And if the hand never comes back?" "Then we change the work." He gave a bitter laugh. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't simple. It is still a choice." She pushed the pouch back across the table. "You do not get to teach me that freedom means choosing, and then take the choice away when it becomes inconvenient to you." The cabin held the sound of the stove and their breathing. Gideon had believed sending her away was the cleanest act of care he had left. Now he saw the old arrogance inside it. Cray had decided what Lydia owed. Her stepfather had decided what her labor was worth. Even Gideon, with better intentions, had begun deciding what future she should accept. He sat down. His anger went with the movement, leaving only exhaustion. "I don't know how to need someone," he said. Lydia's face softened, but she did not rescue him from the admission. "You can learn." "What if I'm poor at it?" "You were poor at asking permission, too?" He looked up. A small smile touched her mouth. "You improved." Gideon covered the pouch with his right hand. "I won't order you to leave again." "That isn't the same as asking me to stay." "No." "Not yet." She picked up the compass and closed his fingers around it. "Keep this until your hand can hold it without help." Her palm remained beneath his for a moment, steadying both the compass and him. Then she took the rabbit outside to dress it. Late winter narrowed their world, but no longer divided it into rescuer and rescued. Gideon learned to set snares one-handed, with a knee braced against the spring. Lydia built a wooden jig that held leather still while he cut it. He taught her which pelts brought the highest price. She taught him to write inventory figures large enough that neither of them could pretend not to see them. When his hand cramped, she took over without apology. When her old fear drove her to work past dark, he shut the tool chest and made coffee. Some nights she still barred the loft door. Other nights she forgot. By March, Gideon could close 3 fingers around Caleb's compass. The last 2 remained weak, and his shoulder would never again lift as high as before. He expected grief. What came instead was relief when Lydia handed him a repaired bridle and said, "Hold this side." Not all of it, only his side. Beyond the cabin, snow began sliding from the fir branches in heavy sheets. Water sounded beneath the creek ice. The mountain was not yet finished with winter, but for the first time, the road below Black Fir was beginning to exist again. So was the choice waiting at its end.